So while we're waiting for the others to come in, this is just a review of the names of the hierarchies. There were some questions about how many hierarchies there are. I didn't dwell on the basics because I was intending and did deliver a bit more of an advanced course last time. I wanted to deliver it to the members of the Anthroposophical Society who already have some exposure to this information. So rather than dwell on the names, and certainly this document was available in the recording, but rather than dwell on the names, I just worked with the angels, archangels, and archai quite a bit last time, and briefly mentioned exousiae, dynamis, thrones, cherubims, seraphim, or as they're more recently known, spirits of form, spirits of motion, spirits of wisdom, spirits of will. And we almost never use these names of Steiner, spirits of harmony and spirits of universal love. We almost always use cherubim and seraphim. So last week, last presentation, we looked at some of the characteristics of the third hierarchy and how they have a different constitution, one from the other, and certainly very different from us, and how the hierarchies looked at as groups have a very different level of consciousness. So the hierarchies are made up of diverse and distinct groups of beings. This meeting, so I think I'll launch into it right now. In this meeting, I want to spend some time talking about how we got here. This is a picture of today, but how did we get here? What does Steiner tell us about the history, not only of the human being, but the history of the hierarchies? In fact, the history of the whole solar system. What does Steiner have to tell us about what we call cosmology? And the history goes back a long way. So I will hide this for a moment. Good. All right, to dive into the history of the solar system, we can anchor it a bit in actual astronomy or astrophysics. The modern science of the physical world has something to say about the history of our solar system. We're told that it was early on a more amorphous or homogeneous collection of material, and the planets solidified out of that, and the sun concentrated in the center. That's the story that we've been given for the evolution of the solar system. But interestingly, in the most recent years, well, last couple of decades, astrophysicists have been talking about something called metallicity. Metallicity is the concept that we have too many elements in our solar system for the amount of time that it's been here. We have elements from hydrogen and helium up through uranium and the heavier elements that are very brief, short-lived elements, the transuranic. So we have 100 and something elements in the solar system that the planets and the sun and the interstellar gas or interplanetary gas in the solar system are made up of. And that many elements cannot be constructed in a solar furnace by fusion. That's the story we're told, that things like hydrogen can fuse into helium and it gives off a huge amount of energy. But that type of construction of brand new elements takes quite a bit of time, according to astrophysics. In fact, it takes so much time that to create 110 elements, or however many have been discovered so far, is impossible in the period of time that the astrophysicists think the solar system's been around. So the explanation for that, metallicity, the explanation is that we must have begun this solar system with physical material that was left behind from another solar system that had been doing the same work for its whole life, and perhaps had destroyed itself in a nova, or perhaps had collapsed into a red dwarf. But in some way or other, that solar system, its whole life generating elements, gave us what we inherited as the beginning of our solar system, and our sun could continue to evolve elements. And in fact, the astrophysicists say that's not enough. There must have been 2 or perhaps even 3 prior solar systems in the history of the evolution of what we live in now, our current solar system. So interesting to astrophysicists, but also interesting to us, because in the early 1900s, Rudolf Steiner told us the same thing. He told us that our solar system had previous incarnations, that we can look back before the beginning of our solar system and discover history in this universe, in this galaxy, I would presume. We can discover history that's relevant to us, that we actually have history stretching back not only to the prehistoric times, not only to the cooling of the earth and the appearance of life, not even to the beginning of this solar system. We have history that Rudolf Steiner tells us about back past the beginning of this solar system. So I'm going to do the most difficult thing for you, and I'm going to start from the very beginning. The very beginning is the strangest part of this story, or at least up to the current day, it's the strangest part. If we go back through the previous planets, we actually have less than planetary systems, solar systems, those 2 words I use interchangeably. If we go back far into the distance, astrophysicists would say billions of years, billions and billions, as Carl Sagan used to enjoy saying, into the past, then we end up with history that's less complex physically and progressively less complex as we go all the way back 3 solar systems before our own. Rudolf Steiner gives all these solar systems names. He names them after the current planets. There are some esoteric reasons for that, but I won't have time to go into that. So he names the earliest solar system that he says should have any interest to humans because we have a connection to it. The earliest solar system he names ancient Saturn, or old Saturn. So it's not the planet Saturn, it's a solar system before our own, before our own, all the way 3 solar systems back to a solar system. And I'm using the word very lightly because astrophysicists wouldn't consider it a solar system at all, that Steiner names ancient Saturn. So how did this come into existence? This is the beginning of a story that repeats itself and becomes richer with each repetition. How did the ancient Saturn solar system come into existence? Well, we studied the hierarchies last presentation, and this one, we're going right back to the hierarchies and looking at them. Probably you could consider from the opposite direction. Rather than from the angels down, we'll look at the roles and activities that the hierarchies have all through this history, from the cherubim and seraphim down through to today and beyond. I hope we have a bit of time for the beyond. That's always interesting. Where are we going and why should we take it seriously? So I told you this was the most difficult because I'm asking you now to imagine a solar system with no sun, no planets, no solid matter, no liquid matter, no gas. How can you have a solar system? What's left? How can we have the beginning of a physical solar system with all of those things not in existence? Well, there is one more physical element in anthroposophy, not only solid, liquid, and gas, But Steiner tells us to take quite seriously the existence of warmth as an element of the physical world. Ancient Saturn was made up only of warmth. So partway through ancient Saturn, when it had developed enough that it was rather physical, Steiner said we could imagine that were we there as our current selves and took a spaceship through this solar system, would actually feel warmer in the middle of it than it would outside it, if we can say such things. Some of the terms we use now don't directly apply, but the warmth is the only physical element that existed in that solar system. And I said halfway, partway through, near the end of the solar system, the warmth would be readily detectable. What happened before that? How did that warmth come into existence? What was it? What's its origin story? Why do we have an ancient Saturn solar system at all? Well, this is the beginning of the story. Every solar system, Steiner tells us, every dwelling place of beings that we are associated with comes into existence because of a sacrifice of one of the levels of the hierarchies. So normally, if I was in person, I would do this at the blackboard. And once I had to do it in person without a blackboard, and I waved my hands a lot. That's not a great approach. I really demanded a lot of imagination from my audience. So I'm using a compromise this time. I'm going to use let's say a cosmic blackboard. I'm going to create a document in front of you. I don't know if you can see the cosmology blackboard now. It's visible. Good. So I'm going to start filling this in as I talk, because there's no picture I can show you of ancient Saturn, the solar system of warmth. It doesn't look physically like anything. There's nothing at all to see, but I can begin to describe it for you. And as I do, I'll fill in this chart, because after a couple of rows, it will start to make some sense. So I said that a solar system comes into existence because of sacrifice of a hierarchical rank of higher beings. And oops, that's not very complete. Sorry about that. See all my typing skills as we go. The beings that sacrificed, and Steiner describes it as sacrificed their lowest component. So if we sacrificed our lowest component today, it would be the solid. So if we could somehow sacrifice our solid and continue to exist as the bag of water and gas that we also are, without our solid holding it together, we'd be very different beings. Well, the beings that sacrificed their lowest element are the thrones, also known as the spirits of will. Oh, that's great. What a speller I am. Just a moment. Thrones. And they sacrificed their lowest element, which I will briefly describe, becomes warmth. What's this human state? Very important. We'll get to that in a moment. So when the initial sacrifice happened, the thrones were described as sacrificing to the beings above them. So they sacrificed their warmth to the cherubim. And the cherubim are the beings that held that together in space so that it could form a solar system. So these two groups of beings in particular are cooperating to create a concentration of warmth that we can call ancient Saturn. If you can imagine that, nothing you can see, nothing you can hear or taste, but you can feel it with your warmth sense. That solar system initially was entirely spiritual, because the spirits of will were actually sacrificing a spiritual substance. But over the period of the life of this solar system, the beings, in particular the thrones, but all of the other hierarchical groups that were around, began to work on this. They worked on the warmth from the outside. They worked on the warmth radiating their essence towards the warmth and experiencing the reflection of that. So, for instance, the spirits of form, quite a few steps down from the spirits of will, spirits of wisdom, spirits of motion, and then spirits of form, who are also known today as the Elohim or the Exousiai. The spirits of form were at the periphery of this solar system, radiating into it their image or their form. And the reflection that came back to them was the result of their influence on this collection of warmth. So that partway through, the warmth took on actual physical nature. And then by mid solar system lifetime, the warmth took on a bit of structure. So the structure was described by Steiner as similar to a mulberry. So perhaps we would use a raspberry as an example, something with a lot of little round globules attached to each other, without any central seed, just a collection of little globes. And eventually, with the influence of other beings like the dynamis, the spirits of motion, these globes began to move in and out. When they moved into the middle, they dissolved. When they moved out, they reformed as globes. So there's a bit of structure going on. Steiner doesn't describe this solar system in as much detail as the others, but I'm spending time on it because it is the scaffolding for all of the rest. And so this structure gave the opportunity for a group of beings who were not yet what Steiner calls human. They were not yet at the human stage. That's not us. That's another group of beings. In fact, a group of beings well above us. The archi could begin to work with the globes of warmth and could inhabit them, or could be said to incarnate into them, or could be said to be awake in them. And then when the globe moves to the center, the archi go back into their sleep or their spiritual stage. And then as the globe comes back forming at the surface, they incarnate again. So the archi could experience the physical world as individuals separate from each other in these little globes of warmth, strange as it may be. And the archi then developed as individual beings that have individual biographies and history and persist incarnation after incarnation. That's my description of what Steiner calls the human stage. It's something we can do now. We can incarnate into a body. We can go to sleep and wake up in the same body. We can die and reincarnate and bring all of our history with us. Quite different from what an animal does, according to Steiner's description. An animal may incarnate into a body, develop quite a personality, especially our pets. We get to know the individual personalities. But when that animal dies, the individual experience is absorbed back into the group soul. And so there isn't a persistent individual dog. The dog who comes back is a new creation from the group soul each time. So we don't do that. We maintain our history. And way back in ancient Saturn, the archi did that as well. So I'm going to run out of time if I give this much attention to every solar system, because if I'm able to, I'd also like to talk about the beings that are backward or non-normally evolving. And that's always interesting to people. But let's just move on superficially and quickly through so that you can see, if you don't know this, you'll be able to see the pattern developing. So what happens to a solar system? It evolves and develops complexity, and then eventually it deteriorates and ceases to exist in some way or other. In this case, we could imagine the warmth dispersing into the galaxy and not being a concentrated area anymore. That end of the solar system, end of the physical occurrence of a solar system, frees up all of the higher beings that are attached to this solar system, and they go off into something we call pralaya. It's a rest period. Steiner said that we can't and he couldn't perceive what goes on in the depth of pralaya. It's a purely physical, purely spiritual state in which you could say that they rest from their experience, or you could say they ponder and digest the work they've done to prepare for another physical excursion. So after that pralaya, which takes an unknown amount of time, Steiner didn't describe whether it's 1,000 years or a billion years or 1,000 billion years. We don't have those time frames. Actually, I'll briefly go back into ancient Saturn. What did the Archai do with this balls of warmth? It's a very unusual statement Steiner makes. The Archai mastered time. That in fact, what we think of as time didn't really function, or he even says didn't exist at the beginning of the solar system, ancient Saturn. So the Archai were working not only with warmth, but with the progress of events, which we call time. So even now, the Archai are considered to be the time spirits. So they've continued that work from their human stage forward. All right, trying to move a little faster. After the pralaya that ended ancient Saturn, the beings that were involved in the creation and evolution of ancient Saturn came back again, including the individual Archai. And they came back to a solar system that Steiner will describe as the ancient sun. But when they came back, they didn't come back to the exact same very simple warmth solar system. They came back. And the first significant event is the sacrifice by another group of higher beings. The next step down, the throne, after the thrones, I'll give you the Greek name because I often use it, and if it pops out of my mouth, you'll know what I'm talking about. Kyriotetes, which are also known as the spirits of, not if, of wisdom. The spirits of wisdom sacrificed their lowest component, which at that point was gas. So you could say air, but I'll use the modern term gas, all the gas that we're familiar with. They sacrificed their lowest component, but they also sacrificed their, you could say that they didn't sacrifice the gas. Probably that's the wrong way for me to describe, spelling again. They sacrificed, I'll even do it the other order so that it looks a little better. They sacrificed their etheric. Yeah, actually, let me just leave it at that and build up to the idea that gas appears. They sacrificed their etheric substance into this mix. So we have something more complex for the groups of spirit hierarchies that we've talked about in the past. They can work with something that's not only warmth, but also etheric. But by a sort of esoteric chemistry, when a higher substance is brought into existence from the spiritual world, a lower substance also appears, precipitates out. And that's why the gas is mentioned. So as the etheric is sacrificed, the gas precipitates out into the solar system. So now we have a solar system made up of all three of these items: warmth and gas and etheric, at least the first etheric. So it's a much more complex environment in which some of the gas could be warmer than other. Some of the gas that's warm might be enlivened by the etheric, and other parts of the solar system might have less etheric, might be considered to be dead. There's a difference between heavily etherized and lightly etherized substance. There's warm and less warm substance. The gas can concentrate. So it's quite straightforward for us to imagine that gas concentrating eventually into a ball of gas, perhaps like a Jupiter or a Saturn or a Neptune, but continuing to concentrate until partway through the evolution of ancient sun, there is actually a ball of gas in the center that's so concentrated that by the end of the solar system, it is a functioning sun. So astronomers would now be able to say, here's a solar system in this place. It seems to have no planets because they wouldn't be able to see the warmth planet. Well, there might be some beginning of the gas planet, so they might be able to see a planet surrounding, although Steiner doesn't describe that at this solar system. And so we have the sacrifice creating a more complex environment, and that environment allows another group of beings which on ancient Saturn weren't able to take advantage of the material that was available and become human, but now in a more complex environment, and they've done their evolution as well. They've now reached the stage at which they can take advantage of that. And these are more familiar. Archangels. So the archangels are beginning their human stage. Now, how does Steiner describe this? It's not a ball of warmth with little mulberries floating in and out. It's now a solar system with a massive amount of gas, particularly in the middle. And eventually that gas is capable of producing light, because the first etheric is the light etheric, and we now have that active in the solar system. So the archangels in their individual nature are described as riding the beams or rays of light from the center to the periphery. The archangels ride these beams of light from the center to the periphery and then collapse back to the center. That's their equivalent of wake and sleep, or incarnation and discarnation. So a very different environment, but it again gives an opportunity for a group of beings to individualize and maintain their individuality, so that individual archangels can ride the next beam of light and come back with their history and ride the next beam of light. So we now have two groups that have newly become individuals and are participating in the environment. And once again, the spirits of form, for instance, have their role, just as the spirits of motion, the spirits of wisdom, the spirits of will. All of these beings are working on the solar system, most of them from the outside, the archangels from the inside. Now, Steiner doesn't describe where the archi are working from. That would be quite interesting to me. I believe that the archi could be working from inside the solar system at this point. Okay, going quickly on, because I do want to cover a lot of material superficially rather than any of it in depth. This solar system will collapse. It will disperse into non-existence, and it will then the beings who have experienced and developed their skills working with these materials will rest, and they will come back, you could say, to the next class, the next grade. They've done everything they needed to learn from ancient sun, and they come back to a new solar system. Ancient moon is the name that Steiner gives it. And once again, this solar system is enriched by a sacrifice of a group of beings that sacrificed their lowest component. And this group of beings, if you have memorized the chart, you'll see the pattern. This is the group of beings next down. Spirits of motion sacrifice their astral substance. And so that becomes part of this solar system. Once again, increasing the complexity, increasing the variety that this material can manifest in. We can have a central sun, which was mastered in the last solar system, but we also have something in which motion has a particular meaning. So the spirits of motion have given the astral substance, and the esoteric chemistry says that that higher substance appearing in the solar system will also precipitate a lower substance, in this case, the material substance of the liquids. So now we have a solar system in which there's warmth and gas and liquid, etheric and astral. There's actually a second etheric by now as well. And in this case, the beings that, it's not hard to guess, are about to experience their human stage are the angels. So in the ancient moon, the angels first individualized and became human. It certainly doesn't mean that the angels, nor the archangels, nor the archai looked like us. These are different beings than us. But they had the opportunity for the first time and ongoing from then to be individuals and maintain their own history. So ancient moon solar system had all of this complexity in it. It's quite straightforward for us to imagine a solar system in which things start to differentiate in a modern way. A central sun with gas and warmth, liquids staying out to the periphery and eventually condensing into spheres that we could consider to be planetary. So not spheres of rock, but spheres of liquid. That would be a very recognizable solar system to a modern astrophysicist. But the angels were developing in a solar system that had no solid ground. So on the planet that they evolve on, they don't have a solid ground. So you must imagine them always having a fluid edge to them, like a liquid would, rather than being a solid. And if you remember last presentation, I described the angels as still having that composition. The angels have mastered the liquid, and they can manifest to us physically in the liquid. But an angel doesn't manifest as a solid being now, nor did it when it was going through its human stage in the ancient moon. So much to say about this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to move on. After the pralaya, we have reached the point at which we're in our modern solar system. And who gave the substance to increase the richness of the composition of this solar system? Who sacrificed their lowest component? Well, if you're Hebrew, you would call them the Elohim. If you're Greek, you would call them the exousiai. If you're an anthroposophist and you want to use Steiner's modern term, then they're the spirits of form. And that's, for me, a huge topic. I'm working with another colleague to write a book on the Elohim in the Earth's solar system in particular. So it's a huge topic. There's a lot to be said, which I won't say today. I will just continue at my rather high level analysis of this. The Elohim, we know, sacrificed their lowest component, the ego, to us. They dripped the ego down into the individual beings on the earth. And as the ego became present in the solar system, so did the solids precipitate out. And we now have a solar system in which solids, liquids, gas, and warmth are all present physically. And ego, astral, etheric, and the spiritual version of warmth are all present in the solar system as well. And so who became human? The people who claim that word now. We did. We became human in this solar system. A little confusing, the word human being used in two different ways. Very briefly, I'm going to break this solar system's history into 7 pieces and show it to you. So I'll stop this share for a moment, bring up another one. That is, very good, there it is. So again, I hope that's large enough for you to see, but I'll just talk about it briefly. Here we see Saturn, or ancient Saturn, ancient sun, ancient moon, Earth, and 3 of the future that I hope to have a few moments to talk about. But let's look at Earth for a moment. Earth, the entire history of the solar system in which the Earth exists. It's not just the Earth, but the history of the entire solar system that we're in now can be broken into 7 divisions. And the names that Steiner and others before him have given to these divisions are the Polaris or Polarian age, or epoch. I better be careful. The translators often use the word epoch all over the place. They use the word age quite interchangeably. I try hard to restrict myself to use the word epoch for these major divisions. So the Polarian epoch, the Hyperborean epoch, the Lemurian epoch, Atlantean, we're starting to hear words we have some familiarity with, and then the first post-Atlantean, which is the one we're in now. And I split it out. I'll go to that point in a moment. And then 2 more great epochs after us before the pralaya that ends this solar system. So very briefly, what can I say about the Polarian epoch? I could have done this division of 7 for the moon, the ancient sun, the ancient Saturn. All of those Steiner has given us a division of 7 and described how things evolved during those divisions. I'll just focus on the current solar system we're in. During the Polarian epoch, the solar system was, like ancient Saturn, one large collection of material. Not just warmth in this case, much more complex, but just one undifferentiated collection of material. We could call this the dust ball that the astronomers like to describe as our beginning. During the Hyperborean age, the sun had separated from that ball of material, concentrated in the center. And the beginning, some of the outer planets are starting to appear. At the end of Hyperborea, our planet has also assembled itself. And so we have the sun, many of the outer planets, our own planet. However, our own planet is not quite as it is now. It contains a bit more material because it's actually the collection of all the material that our current Earth and current moon are made of. When I was a kid, I knew that the moon was captured as it passed by as a giant asteroid, or maybe something crashed and we got a piece of something and it formed itself into the moon. But then as I grew older, I started to hear about Anthroposophy and the description that the moon came from the Earth. And then finally, as I was an adult, I was starting to hear astrophysics saying the same thing. Well, one possibility is that the Earth and moon separated during the evolution of the solar system. It's now acknowledged as a very strong theory. So we now have support, once again, for something that Steiner was saying at the beginning of the 1900s, that the Earth and moon separated during the evolution of the solar system, and that the moon came out of the Earth. In one description, you could think of it as a bit like a toffee, where it's stretching and then it breaks the cord. Or in other more artistic descriptions, like the birth of a child, again, the breaking of the cord at one point. So the higher beings separated the moon from the earth at a certain point, and that period is Lemuria. A lot of things happened in Lemuria. That was the period in the Bible of Adam and Eve. That was the period at which the sexes became distinct for human beings. Some of the lower animals had begun that differentiation, but the initial human beings were androgynous. They reproduced, you could say, by budding, and they weren't anywhere near as solid physical beings as we are now. But gradually over the period of Lemuria, we took on more solidity, and we certainly took on the separate genders. And as we gave up the capacity to reproduce out of ourselves, we were able to devote those for the higher beings were able to, on our behalf, devote those forces to our brain and our thinking capacity. So we became much more capable beings in terms of thinking, not only the feeling and in particular the willing that we came with to the Lemurian age. And then during Atlantis, we experimented with many physical forms, but gradually established a solid and stable physical form. A language began to appear, memory was powerful, and the world was fluid or enlivened enough that what we would today call magic was very active. And there was a great activity of that type. Our consciousness was extremely different. We were much more tribal, almost totally tribal, and much more in tune with the spiritual realities than we were with the physical realities surrounding us. Then each one of these have a division between them. They have a sort of mini pralaya. The mini pralaya between Atlantis and the first post-Atlantean age is the flood, the legend of the flood. So this, in other words, is our historical age or epoch. This is our historical epoch, which can be broken in anthroposophical style into 7 ages. The age we're currently in, which we number here as 5th cultural age, the preceding Greco-Latin, the preceding age to that, which had many dominant cultures, Chaldea, Babylonia, Assyria, Egypt. The preceding age to that, where we're starting to get a bit more legendary, we don't have as much historical record, ancient Persian, and the ancient Indian, the age right after the flood. And so Steiner gives us great descriptions that were I able to teach this over 7 weeks instead of 1 hour, I would be pleased to go into detail, but I won't. I'll just move on. We're in the 5th cultural age of this great epoch, and this 5th cultural age will be followed by a 6th. Each of these ages are 2,160 years long. That's determined by an astronomical progression of the equinoxes. So the 6th age will start 14 and 21, 35, about 3600 AD is the beginning of the 6th age. And we see some description of the 6th age, of the 7th age in Revelations in the Bible. And we have many descriptions of how we will, although we will look similar, our consciousness will be changed from what it is now. Our capacities and feeling capacities as well as thinking will be different than they are now, assuming we can healthily progress. And then ultimately a final cultural age before a great division between the first post-Atlantean epoch, or you could say 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th great epoch and the 6th great epoch. It's a little confusing. 6th cultural age, very soon. 6th great epoch, more like 9,000 AD. That will be the division between those two, our current great epoch and the next one, is the term many of you have heard, the war of all against all. So we had a flood, and we will have a war of all against all, separating us from the next great epoch. And I'd love to talk about that, but I won't. I will actually put this away, but I'm happy to take questions at the end. So I will just put this away for a moment. Go back to the cosmology blackboard and finish this picture because it gets pretty interesting. What's happening in the future? I could talk about what's happening in the sixth cultural age that's coming very soon. That's a very near future, and it's not so dramatically different. We can manage to imagine that that could be real. I could talk about what comes after the war of all against all in the sixth great epoch. It's getting a little stranger, where there are some dramatic things happening during that period physically. But instead, I'm going to jump all the way to the pralaya at the end of our solar system. So at the end of our solar system, we have the solar system has dispersed or perhaps even exploded in a nova. However it ends, it will no longer be demanding the attention of all of the spiritual beings that were maintaining it. And so the pralaya will occur, and after the pralaya, we will have the creation of a new solar system. And that one, let's use the word future now, is often named by Steiner and others as future Jupiter. And future Jupiter will be enriched by a further sacrifice, a sacrifice not of the spirits of form now who've done their work, but of the next step down. So the beings that we currently know as the Archi will be sacrificing. I won't even put in spirits of personality, that's not often used. The Archi will be sacrificing their lowest component. Now, what will happen to the composition? Steiner's not so clear here. So I'm going to leave that empty. We can speculate if we have time. But what will happen in terms of human stage? That's again open to interpretation. Steiner gives many indications to us. Some of them are as clear as can be, and many of them are not. And often when he goes around to the other side of the tree to tell us something, he really confuses me. So, and the rest of my colleagues. So the easiest answer would be that what we call the animals today are the ones that will become human in the future Jupiter stage. And that's a very reasonable progression. There is another speculation that's a little more esoteric. We'll get to that if we have time. So if the animals are becoming human, maybe we could stop here and say, what are we doing? We can focus for a moment on us. In future Jupiter, what's our role? So if you remember, the roles of the angels are one-to-one. The archangels are a group of humans to one. The Archi are an entire planet for a period of time and upwards. So the scope of a hierarchy's responsibilities increases as you go up the descriptive list, but it also increases solar system after solar system. So the angels were just humans back in the moon, and now they're angels. So the angels are doing what the one-to-one job that the humans will inherit next time. So we humans, that's tricky using the word, we, whatever we call ourselves in the next solar system, will be performing the one-to-one support role that humans do in this solar system. I'm saying it awkwardly because I want to make it clear that it's not as simple as humans become angels in Jupiter. That's so easy to say. In Jupiter, we'll all be angels, but it's not accurate. In Jupiter, we will have the responsibility that angels have in this solar system, if we succeed in evolving properly during this solar system. So that's a fine point, but I think an important one to realize that we and the current angels are different beings and will remain different. The angels, therefore, the ones we call angels today, will assume the role of archangels in future Jupiter. The current angels will have responsibilities for a group of humans, the humans of Jupiter. Not groups of us now, but groups of the humans of Jupiter. That's what the angels will assume responsibility for. And the archangels similarly will have the scope that archi have now in future Jupiter. So if I'm not jumping around too much, you can see a progression not only of who's sacrificing and who becomes human, but were we to spend the time, each of the hierarchies is evolving upwards in responsibility. And now, at the end of the Earth's solar system, we are the 10th hierarchy. And we are also, ideally, if we do our jobs, evolving forward through responsibilities. So very quickly, what else do we have? We have, after that pralaya, the creation of a new solar system, which Steiner describes with the name Future Venus. And the angels, having trouble with that, there we go. And the hierarchies that are going to sacrifice their lowest component are the archangels. Again, I won't get into the composition, but you could say that the animals, that the beings that are on this solar system as plants will move to the stage of animals next solar system, Jupiter, and ultimately have their human stage on future Venus. And so if I can keep you all juggling these balls in the air, our responsibility will be up to the level of the archangels today. In future Venus, we will be working at the level of the archangels. So without going into any detail, let's finish this picture. And we don't even really need the word future here because the name, the planetary name that Steiner assigned isn't recognized as a physical planet in our solar system. So we don't have to say future Vulcan. We could just say Vulcan. The angels have evolved so far by now, 3 solar systems from now. By this point, the angels have evolved so far that they are the ones sacrificing their lowest component. And the beings that we think of as, what shall we call them? Stones, rocks, minerals, have evolved so far that they are experiencing their human stage. And we have evolved so far that we are taking the responsibility of angels, archangels, archi. At this point, we're taking the responsibility of archi. We are, in some individual or collective way, responsible now for the entire collection of human beings on that planet, which are highly evolved today's stones. Very confusing sometimes if you use these physical words across different time frames. But if you can follow that, then of course the exciting thing to anybody who likes to read fiction or science fiction, well, what's next? You always want to know what's next, and what's next is so dramatic. Just imagine that we have taken the role of archi in Vulcan. After we finish that solar system, we have the full capacity that the archi had at the end of that solar system, and we will then be ready to take the next step. So when we finish this 7-fold evolution of our physical and spiritual capacity, we will be coming back after this, independent of this whole evolutionary system, capable of performing the role of the Elohim. In other words, capable of sacrificing our lowest component. We will be the gods that create the solar system after Vulcan. Such a dramatic concept. That's where we're headed if we can stay the course. So we have a few minutes left, and I'm going at breakneck pace. What about the beings that don't make the grade? What about the beings that don't succeed, perhaps at their human stage, or the beings that don't succeed, perhaps at their angelic stage, a being that should have evolved to perhaps an archai or an archangel by now, but fell behind somewhere. What happens to those beings? Where do they fit in this picture? So sometimes we call them backward beings. Some translators in the past used a very unsupportive name, the retarded beings. I like to think of them as the held back beings, because they actually perform quite important roles in many ways in all aspects of our culture and physicality. But also they perform the role, as we most easily recognize, of the adversaries, the fallen angels and Lucifer, the Ahrimanic beings, including the Ahrimanic elementals and Ahriman. And beyond that, if we were to talk about the beings beyond that, the Asuras and the Soratic beings, there are backwards beings. And it took me quite a while to be able to speak confidently about what is the origin story or the history of Lucifer as opposed to Ahriman. Lucifer is a great archangel, the most glorious of them all. Why is Lucifer such an advanced archangel? There's support in the material Steiner gave us to indicate that when Lucifer reached the stage of archangel, he had already lost one stage. So Lucifer, actually having progressed normally, would have been one of the archai. But Lucifer, in fact, failed at some point, and probably during the ancient moon, to progress, and then remained with the capacity on this earth of an archangel, but a powerful archangel, an archangel with the history of the archai, but only the capacity to perform the office of an archangel. And similarly, what's the origin story of Ahriman? Ahriman is an archai, a being that's very powerful, that Michael had to ascend to battle. But there is one passage that I was able to identify where Steiner fairly clearly says that Ahriman would have been a higher being, but was held back to the level of archai. So Ahriman would actually have been an Elohim, a being that would have been sacrificing its lowest component, but wasn't capable of that. And so came into the solar system with the functioning responsibilities of archai, not of Elohim. And so an extremely powerful archai with the history of an Elohim. All right, that's a really quick introduction to the backward beings. So I'm going to stop the official presentation and open up to questions, which can go in any direction you like. Ed, ask away, or leave if you wish, because we've reached the end of the hour. So thank you for paying attention.
Okay, Grant, I have lots of questions for you, but I'll only ask one.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. In a rather obscure place, I saw that Ralph Steiner once mentioned that it's an illusion that if we believe our physical body really belongs to us. He characterizes somehow as the physical body really still belongs to the to the thrones, but it's like they sacrifice the ownership, let's just say, to us. And to me, that's why there has to be a pralaya at each planetary evolution, because the thrones have to actually take it back. But I don't know if you agree with that.
Yes, so many ways to go with that question. Lots of leading questions hidden in it. I'd start by saying, when I try to imagine, or when I try to describe, well, what do the thrones mean in the world today? I imagine a mountain, because the thrones have continued to bear responsibility for the physical matter even though they first sacrificed warmth, they have been responsible for working with that in every solar system until finally the physical matter has reached the density of solid. So I walk on the floor thanks to the thrones. I certainly agree that there's large support in Steiner's material to suggest that we are not our bodies, and in fact, we don't own them. We are using them at the pleasure of the higher beings. That our physicality, were it to have proceeded as planned by the Elohim, wouldn't have included the solid at all. We would have been beings that floated largely in the periphery of the earth. So there's a physical form to us that isn't in any way mineralized. And then in addition to that, we inhabit a physical body that is maintained by the hierarchies. It's an enormously complex structure that has been developed. I didn't go into that at all, but it has been developed over these solar systems. That was the beginning of our body back in ancient Saturn, the balls of warmth, so simple and so uncomplex, continue to be elaborated through each solar system until finally we have, with the extra input of Lucifer, particularly during Lemuria, we have a solid and complex body that we can inhabit. But that's been a development that the hierarchies en masse have worked at over these 4 solar systems so far. So only a partial answer to you, Joe, but lots of support for that question.
Can you speak a little bit more to the differences between a group working from the inside versus the outside? I think you spoke about that a couple times, or mentioned that a couple times.
Yeah, it's quite important to think, or it's helpful, illuminating to think where the groups of beings are working from as their center of influence. So the Elohim are described as working from the sun. And the higher beings can be considered to be working from the sun. When you get to the level of cherubim and seraphim, those beings are clearly working from outside the solar system. They're working at the level of the zodiac. When you look at the lower beings than the Elohim, you can have them residing at the moon sphere or right on the earth, residing on the earth. The fallen angels certainly fully residing on the earth. The pictures that are given during the descriptions of the solar systems quite often have the active beings outside of the sphere of activity. So the Elohim are working from the periphery. They don't descend ever to the earth. In the earlier solar systems, the spirits of form, the Elohim, are always working from the periphery to influence the developing structure of the body that's evolving. The planetary or the dynamies are working within the solar system to move the planets. And so they have responsibilities that are sort of decentralized, but they certainly don't descend onto a planet in any way. I'm not sure which way to go to elaborate that. Did you have anything specific, Sandy? Nope.
No, not really. Just wanted to understand the relationships a little bit more. I think I'll have to work on that.
Yeah, working from the center and the periphery, it's in so many of the anthroposophical arts. It's an important approach to reality to take that direction into consideration when you describe or try to conceive of something. Is it working from the periphery, from the center? Could you say that in some cases it's doing both in different ways? And I guess we could even add that Steiner said that space didn't really come into existence in terms of its functionality until the ancient sun. So in ancient Saturn, although I can describe things as descending into the center and moving back to the surface, it's not really accurate. That until light appeared, we didn't really have space.